Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, September 14th, 2025, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about Ohio State's 37-9 win over Ohio under the lights in the Horseshoe last night. Now, the final score is not an indication of how dominant Ohio State was in this game. The Buckeyes outgained the Bobcats 573 to 181. They outrushed them 228 to 68. They were plus 19 in first downs. Ohio State was nearly plus 6 in yards per play. Julian Sayin delivered his second consecutive 300-yard passing game. Sayin was 25 of 32 for 347 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and 2 picks. More on Sayin in a minute. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate combined for 254 yards receiving on 14 catches and 2 touchdowns. And for the second week in a row, freshman Bo Jackson went over 100 yards. Jackson finished the night with a game-high 109 yards rushing on only 9 carries. And the explosive play was on full display for the Ohio State offense last night. Smith had receptions of 42 yards and 47 yards. The latter was good for a touchdown in the third quarter. And Carnell Tate's touchdown catch went for 49 yards. By the way, Smith and Tate's touchdown catches were on back-to-back possessions in the second half that put the game out of reach for the Bobcats. And then after Ohio's only touchdown of the game to start the third quarter, Bo Jackson got loose for a 64-yard run on the very next play from scrimmage to get the Buckeyes back into the Ohio red zone. So a lot of fireworks from the Ohio State offense in this game last night. And aside from one weird, wonky, explosive play, which was the 67-yard catch and run for a touchdown by Ohio's best receiver, Chase Hendricks, the Buckeye defense was suffocating again last night. Only 181 yards of total offense and 3.3 yards per play for the Bobcats in this game. The Buckeyes finished with a season-high 4 sacks and 7 tackles for loss. Star quarterback Parker Navarro had to miss most of the first half with what looked like an injury to his non-throwing hand on a big hit from Bo Atkinson. Now, Navarro would return in the second half, but aside from his touchdown throw to Hendricks to start the third quarter, he was completely neutralized by the Buckeye defense. Navarro finished the night 6 of 13 for 94 yards passing and a touchdown. He was not a factor in the run game, only 3 yards rushing on 5 carries for Navarro last night. Ditto for C.A. Bangura, Ohio's top running back. He was not a factor in this game either. The Buckeyes held Bangura to only 24 yards rushing on 12 carries. So, as I always do on Sundays, I'm going to tick down a short list of observations from last night's performance. With the exception of our friend Paige, who can't be bothered to watch the games anymore, I'm going to assume that the rest of you watched and you know what happened, so I'm not going to cite every single play or every single stat. But that does remind me, I think I need to resend Paige the job description for Ohio State football podcast contributor. I believe the very first bullet point in the requirements section involves actually watching the games. All right, here we go. Now, despite all the gaudy offensive stats for the Ohio State offense that I just cited, there was some red zone sluggishness from the Buckeyes in this game. Ohio State had 6 trips into the Ohio red zone and only converted 2 of those into touchdowns. On Ohio State's first possession of the game, they had a 1st and goal from the Ohio 9-yard line and were eventually stopped on downs. Then in the second quarter, they had a 1st and goal from the Ohio 3-yard line and had to settle for a 20-yard field goal. And then in the third quarter, the Buckeyes had a 1st and 10 from the Ohio 11-yard line and had to settle for another chip shot field goal. You know, I think all 3 of those red zone failures started on first down. C.J. Donaldson was twice stonewalled at the line of scrimmage on 2 of those first downs, and then Ohio State was flagged for a delay of game penalty on the other. I also thought Brian Hartline got a little too cute. I think he called entirely too many pass plays in those 3 red zone situations. Between those 3 trips inside the Bobcat 11-yard line, Ohio State ran 6 pass plays, 4 to Jeremiah Smith, 1 to Carnell Tate, and 1 to C.J. Donaldson. Now, I think you have to give some credit to the Bobcat defense for competing really well in those red zone situations, especially Ohio cornerback Tank Pearson, who had 2 different pass breakups on 3rd and goal in one-on-one coverage with Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. Now, having said that, look, you're Ohio State. I mean, you have a massive size advantage in the trenches against this opponent. You have a short yardage specialist in C.J. Donaldson carrying the football for you. You can't be getting stonewalled on 1st and goal for only 1 yard. I'm sorry, that's just not acceptable. And I think 6 passes in those situations really let the Bobcat defense off the hook. Because even with receivers like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, a fade to the corner of the end zone on 3rd down, it's just an extremely low percentage play. Because the receiver is bracketed on 2 sides, by the sideline and the back of the end zone, and then he has a defensive back draped all over him. I just think you're putting too much pressure on a young quarterback to make a perfect throw in those situations. And Ohio State did that twice last night, once to Tate and the other to Smith. I didn't like either call by Brian Hartline. And then finally, look, a delay of game penalty on 1st down from the 11-yard line. It's just inexcusable. I mean, that's an unforced error, and it's a total gift to the defense. And Ohio State just has to be better on 1st down in those low red zone situations. Period. Full stop. Look, I'm not ready to say Ohio State has a red zone problem after just 1 game, but there were multiple issues involving both execution and play calling that I think need to be ironed out before the Buckeyes start Big Ten play in 2 weeks against Washington, and I trust they'll get that figured out. Let's talk a little bit about Bo Jackson. Now, I said in our preview pod that if Jackson were to enter the game for the first time with the outcome still in doubt, then we'd know the coaching staff was viewing the running back situation like we, the fans, were. And that's exactly what happened last night. Jackson entered the game on Ohio State's 3rd possession at the start of the 2nd quarter. Now, he was stopped for no gain on his first carry, but his next 5 touches went for 105 yards. Not too shabby. Look, the cat is out of the bag. It's plainly obvious to anyone with a pair of eyes that Jackson's easily the best running back on this roster. He unlocks the full potential of the Ohio State rushing attack. There's no doubt about it. I think we can safely say now that Jackson will be a fixture in the running back rotation moving forward. Though my friend Mike made a good point, it's a good reminder that it's likely to be another long 15, 16 game season, and Carlos Loughlin is really going to need to use his depth at that position to keep guys fresh. So expect to see plenty of both Donaldson and Peoples as well as Jackson moving forward. I thought Peoples had his best game of the season last night. I'd been a little hard on him, admittedly, but he was much better yesterday. 6.7 yards per carry on 7 carries. The Buckeyes finished the night with 226 yards rushing at 7.5 yards per carry. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate also contributed in the run game, a combined 25 yards on 2 carries for those two. That included a 17-yard touchdown run on a reverse for Smith. We may have also gotten a preview of a short yardage package for Lincoln Kienholz. Kienholz replaced Julian Sain for 1 play in the 2nd quarter and converted on a 3rd and 2 with an 8-yard run. That could also be a preview of coming attractions in the low red zone if Ohio State continues to struggle in that area moving forward. So a lot to like from the Buckeye rushing attack in this game last night. Now, I thought Julian Sain was mostly brilliant last night, 25 of 32 for 347 yards and 3 touchdown passes, though we did see a few more teachable moments, including a 4th quarter interception at midfield that was just not a good decision at all. Now, to be fair, the pass protection on the play was a little weird. Tegris Shabola's blocking assignment was running all the way from his position at right guard to block the left defensive end, Jay Crable. Shabola bumped into Luke Montgomery at the snap, so he was a little late getting there. Crable blew right past him and smothered Sain. But instead of just taking the sack, which was really the only right choice, Sain tossed the ball into the line of scrimmage as he was going down, and it was intercepted by defensive tackle Austin Mitchell. Ohio State thankfully had a comfortable 30-9 lead at the time, and the turnover didn't result in any points for Ohio. But look, that was a play Sain, no doubt he'd like to have back. He has to make a better choice there. Now, I thought Sain's 2nd interception just before halftime was just a nice play by Ohio defensive tackle Nehemiah Dukes. Dukes tipped the ball at the line of scrimmage, and Michael Mack intercepted it off the carom. Give credit to the Bobcat defense on that play. But it's worth noting, and I'm not too worried about it right now, Julian Sain has 3 picks in his last 2 games. So that's something I'm going to be watching moving forward, is ball security, avoiding some of those avoidable mistakes that result in turnovers for the opponent. Otherwise, I can't imagine things going any better for Julian Sayin than what we've seen through these first 3 games. He's completing 79% of his passes at 11 yards per attempt. He can make all the throws, and the vertical passing game with Sayin at the controls is alive and well. Ohio State is currently tied for second nationally in pass plays of 40-plus yards with 7. Now, I said in our preview pod on Thursday that I wanted to see the core of the Ohio State defensive line create more pressure on the quarterback than they did against Texas and Grambling State. And according to PFF, that's what they did. The Buckeyes finished with 21 pressures on Ohio quarterbacks last night. Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden McDonald, and Bo Atkinson combined for 14 of those pressures. Curry led the way with 7. Curry, McDonald, and Atkinson each also registered a sack. I was really impressed with Curry in particular. He finished as the defense's highest graded defender according to PFF with an overall grade of 90.2. He also finished with the defense's highest grade for pass rush of 91.8. And I continue to be impressed by the play of the interior defensive line. Now, Caden McDonald didn't grade out as high as he did against Texas and Grambling State, but as I mentioned, he did have a sack. And it's not easy to get a sack as a nose tackle. I mean, their job is to eat up blocks so the defensive ends can get to the quarterback. And I think McDonald's doing very well in that department as well, but he's also making plenty of plays on his own. And look, Tywan Malone and Will Smith Jr. have also played very well for this defensive line. They both graded out really well once again yesterday. Malone actually started in place of Edric Houston, who's clearly still injured, by the way, and finished with an overall PFF grade of 78.5 and an excellent grade against the run of 80.9. That actually led the defense. And Will Smith Jr., again, finished with another impressive overall grade of 77.4 and a rush defense grade of 75. Malone and Smith Jr., look, they're not going to get a lot of recognition because of the positions that they play. They do a lot of thankless work for this defense. But look, thanks to them, the interior defensive line depth is no longer a concern. In fact, I think you could even say it's a relative strength. So kudos to McDonald, Smith Jr., and Malone for their play so far this season. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese were excellent again last night. They finished with overall PFF grades of 89.2 and 83.8 respectively. Reese's versatility was on full display once again last night. He finished as Ohio State's leading tackler with 7. He also had 2 pass breakups, which led the team, and a sack. And like he did against Arch Manning in the opener, Matt Patricia used Reese as a spy on Parker Navarro most of the night. Reese was, quite frankly, he was a big reason the defense was so successful at neutralizing Navarro. And, again, outside of that one weird explosive play by a pretty good receiver in Chase Hendricks, the defense was just suffocating. And the play of that unit really allowed Ohio State to control the game while the offense kind of, they kind of played with their food most of the first half. It took a while for the offense to get going. So look, the red zone struggles notwithstanding, I think this was a really good win for Ohio State. I said on Thursday, I think Ohio is the equivalent of a mid-tier Big Ten team. In fact, on a neutral field, I think the Bobcats could beat Michigan State, Rutgers, which they almost did in Piscataway 2 weeks ago, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, UCLA, Purdue, and Northwestern. And that's half the damn conference. So I'm viewing last night as a 10th regular season conference game for the Buckeyes. And unlike last Saturday's 70-0 win over a hapless Grambling State, I think much of what we watched last night is transferable when the Buckeyes open Big Ten play on September 27th in Seattle against Washington. And speaking of that game, now I've been on record for a while now that the Huskies are going to be a really good test for the Buckeyes. Damon Williams Jr. is going to be one of the best 2 or 3 quarterbacks the Buckeyes will face during the regular season. I'm convinced of that. Now, the Huskies had yesterday off, but through 2 games, Williams Jr. is completing 69% of his passes, and he already has 132 yards rushing at 6.3 yards per carry. And I think Washington has one of probably the best running back in the Big Ten in Jonah Coleman. Coleman already has 288 yards rushing and 7 rushing touchdowns, again, only through 2 games, and he's averaging 7.4 yards per carry. I also really like Denzel Boston, their junior receiver. Boston is he's actually built like an Ohio State receiver, 6'4", 209 pounds. Boston will be one of the better receivers the Buckeyes will face this season as well. So a really really good challenge waiting for the Buckeyes on September 27th in Washington and in an environment that's very difficult to win. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Now, the Buckeyes have next Saturday off, and quite frankly, it's not a super compelling slate of games that day, but there are two juicy Big Ten matchups that I'm going to be watching. Number 23 Michigan at undefeated Nebraska. Remember, Sherrone Moore is suspended and will not be on the sidelines for that game. And the Huskers are playing pretty well. Again, they're undefeated. The early line on that game is Michigan -3. That should be a good one. And then number 9 Illinois travels to number 22 Indiana. Look, it's still early, but if Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are viewed as virtual playoff locks, and they are by most corners of the college football world, a potential fourth playoff bid is going to be decided by games like these two. So look for a pod from me next Sunday recapping Michigan, Nebraska, and Illinois, Indiana, and I'm sure I can find some other Ohio State content to talk about as well. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.